Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm John, and this episode I'm joined by Hannah and Johannes Paavola to talk about the recent Scum and Villainy one-shot we played. Now, obviously, I'm sure everyone's aware of the current situation. A lot of us are trapped indoors. And so those of us who are into the online role-playing, there's been plenty of one-shots going on. Johannes ran as a Stars Without Number one-shot a few nights ago. And it may be longer than that because my conception of time has just entirely...
Yeah, it's fluid now. Timey-wimey stuff.
That's it, exactly. It's like a Doctor Who episode. But last night, no, it wasn't last night, was it?
Thursday night.
Thursday night. See, okay, I don't know. Is it daytime? I don't even know what time zone I'm in.
What even is time?
Indeed. Okay, so we played through this Scum and Villainy game, which is Power by the Apocalypse based. It's Forged in the Dark, so I believe it's based on Blades in the
Blades in the Dark, yeah.
And it's produced by Evil Hat Productions, who I know mainly as the people who create the version of the Fate game they tend to run. And it's pretty much a sort of Star Wars, space opera, lots of sci-fi tropes all thrown in with like the serial numbers gently and lovingly buffed off them. So, Johannes, what was it in particular that made you think Scum and Villainy might be a good choice?
I think as we were talking about what to play with the people that happened to be around at the time, us three and Matthew, I guess it was fairly easy to narrow down our collective interests, and that was lucky that we actually happened to have four people, and we didn't plan ahead for like, what our tastes might be for a game right now, and then just talking down the list of games that would be possible to be run at this time. Scum and Villainy just ticked, I think, at least boxes for all of us, so that was a fairly easy call to make.
Well, that's it. I mean, I think we're all sort of fans of sci-fi, aren't we? I mean, I know you're a massive fan of sci-fi, love.
Well,
yeah.
But,
space. Everything's better in space.
I mean, the thing is, like, because Scum and Villainy is like quite sort of generic, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it takes inspiration from a lot of different places, a lot of like classic sort of tropes. It's going to be rare, I think, to find a role player who doesn't have some sort of sci-fi franchise that they're a fan of.
Yeah, and when we say that, of course, Scum and Villainy, like, the name is a direct reference to Star Wars, but it's not really a Star Wars game in the sort of way that Star Wars narratives have historically worked. It's not that at all.
The way you described it, it seemed a lot more like Firefly than Star Wars in its background. They didn't get much of the background defined, but what there was seems very similar.
Too soon.
Because I was looking at the media references, which is a thing that all role-playing games going forward should include, I think. Like,
definitely.
Inspirations, like, don't be coy about the thing, like, call your game Scum and Villainy, because if you're taking,
well, it's like if you're writing like a university lecture or something, and you're like drawing, you quote your sources, don't you? Your source material that you're referencing. I think absolutely right. We're never going to have like someone hold up a role-play game and go, yes, this is an entirely original concept. No one has ever seen this role-play game before. So why not just own it and just say this is what's influenced me.
And I think it's like there's no one's going to be looking down their nose at you if you're like, I've made this game called Barhammer, and it's about a pseudo-Germanic empire fighting against some Beas cultists. Like, it's like no one's gonna give you shit for like having inspirations, because that's what fucking spoilers here. That's what creativity is. You take influences and then you create new works based on those. But the thing that I was going to mention is the game is called Scum and Villainy. It borrows a lot of stuff from the sort of Star Wars bucket, but they don't mention it in the touchstones. So the touchstones here would be like movies. Guardians of the Galaxy, that checks out. Serenity, we just mentioned that. Actually, they do have Star Wars here as well, but they go into like Cowboy Bebop, Firefly, Killjoys, which is more our thing because we do the bounty hunting stuff. Lost Universe, Blake 7, Outlaw Star, So a lot of the sort of like freewheeling space outlaw
Space
type.
Cowboys.
Yeah, Space Cowboys is exactly that. Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah. And why not? I mean, let's face it. If you ask anyone, like, go back to like Star Wars, if you ask anyone like what their favorite character is, like you ask a group, there'll be plenty of people there who are like, oh, I like Han Solo, I like Chewbacca, because at the start they're the sort of like slightly dodgier sort of, sort of space freewheelers. They do what they want. They're not really with the rebellion at the start, but sort of later on.
Yeah, they're looking out for number one and just trying to make ends meet in their cargo ship.
Now, I believe, I mean, I've not played Blades in the Dark, but I've obviously heard you talk about it before, Johannes. I believe that's based very much around the idea of like your sort of gang performing like heists and holding your territory.
Yeah. It's I don't have my book here, but the idea is that you are a crew of ostensibly either like straight up criminals or otherwise like sort of outcasts from society, and there is no other option for you. Like you can't go out and get a job. That's off the table because the game is not about that. It's about you doing underhanded stuff in an overcrowded city in this setting where you can't go out of the city because that's where you die. And it's a game about you trying to further your crew of, let's say, criminals and like make it big in the criminal underworld. And then, of course, you need to deal with all the other factions of the city, like other gangs, the police, like whoever might be in your way.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not aware of what a sort of like a Powered by the Apocalypse game is, at its very basic, I would describe it as it's a simple game that gives you some clearly defined choices on your character sheet, or your sort of they're normally called like, what's the term they use in Powered by the Apocalypse? They don't just call them characters, they're like player booklets or something. Yeah,
playbooks in Apocalypse World, yes.
Yeah, and basically that you pick a one of these like booklets, one of these playbooks that will be themed around a specific character. So if you're looking at something like Dungeon World, which is a sort of a Powered by the Apocalypse version of D&D, the playbooks are the traditional classes, so like your fighter, your thief, your druid, stuff like that. In Scum and Villainy, obviously you have each playbook focus on like a sort of archetypal style of character. Then you roll some stats for it, you make some choices about what particular abilities you've got, and it allows you to jump straight in.
So this is why I'm such a big fan of the Powered by the Apocalypse, because it means you've got about 5 minutes and you've got a whole character genned up. And obviously the system we were using, it's not quite the same as Powered by the Apocalypse, but again, it's got playbooks. So a lot of those decisions that like some players will agonize over for an hour and a half are reduced down to one tick box.
Yeah.
And it means you can actually get some game in on the first session, because that's where a lot of games fall apart. People gen up characters and then nobody meets up again because it was really boring to gen up those characters.
See, now you can't see this on the podcast, obviously, but when Hannah said, like, oh, someone who agonized over the decision, she was like looking, she was saying that.
I wasn't.
Also,
I might have been, but I wasn't thinking of you.
Oh, thanks.
You know exactly who I was thinking of when I said that.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. So this is mainly just for me, but just to share the information because I like doing that. So Blades in the Dark and the derivatives thereof, they kind of grew from the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff. It's plain to see, probably for everyone, but it's kind of the like at the very least like the second generation, like design wise,
just
where
a little bit more crunchy.
Yeah, and it goes into like further places than the very like hyper focus of most of the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff. So it's a little bit different, and there's a little bit more to it as we have now the crew, because we have a ship, right, in our space freewheeling crew,
the Cerberus,
which has its own sheet where we have different powers, and it has a rating for the engines and that sort of thing.
And I think, as we were saying, as it describes itself, it's one of the Forged in the Dark games. So they started off with Apocalypse World, then it was powered by the Apocalypse, and it was games using that rule system, but to focus in on a different type of game. Obviously, Blades in the Dark came along, and now people are taking that rule set and they're spinning that off to take some of those themes, the idea of, having your sort of crew doing missions, stuff like that, and they're spinning that off into different types of games.
This is because gamers can't resist pulling things apart and trying to put together better.
Of course we can't. It's the game away.
That's what we do.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the great things about Power of the Apocalypse and the sort of Forged in the Dark games is the actual prep and runtime needed to get a session up and running is, from my experience, I mean, I've not run a Forged in the Dark game, but I've run plenty of Power of the Apocalypse games, is quite minimal because the game, because it focuses on one specific thing. In this case, doing like heists and stuff like that, you don't have to spend all the time agonizing over it to get the prep done, and it offers you a lot of tools to help you get that game up and running. So I personally think those games, great for conventions, great for one shot. And I often see people sort of touting as only being good for one shots. But I think certainly, as we've experienced with Scum and Villainy, although we've only done one session, they've added more to it. So it feels to me more like these Forged in the Dark games are more suitable for campaign play than perhaps some of the earlier Apocalypse games.
Yeah, there's definitely, and for both the Powered by the Apocalypse stuff and now the Forged in the Dark stuff, both of those have a limit sort of built in, either a lesser extent or large, like very like defined sense, and it goes from Powered by the Apocalypse Tremulous, which is a game that we played a couple of times. Tremulous, it even says in the books, like, we didn't include like advancement stuff because it's not really a thing, and you probably are dead. So it's not a thing that we like spent a lot of time on. So that's like the other extreme end, and then you have in like between that and then let's say Blaze in the Dark or Scum and Villainy, you have all these other games which like 12 sessions, 12 plus thereabouts, where it kind of, because the mechanics escalate the thing that as you play, it tends to lead to a climax eventually because of the very mechanics of the game. And that what I'm trying to say is, usually, let's say, John, you mentioned Dungeon World. So Dungeon World has the idea of like there's different stuff going on in the world, and while you're engaging with stuff number one, stuff number two will do its own thing because you weren't there to stop it. So it escalates the situation in the world, and eventually things will come to a head, and then there's the denouement, and then maybe you start a new game, maybe you continue, but the story arc is sort of built in to the game because the mechanics escalate the thing, and then there's the climax. And that is true for the Forged in the Dark games as well, but there's a little bit of a longer arc because it's built that way. It's supposed to be a more expansive thing where you look, for example, with Blaze in the Dark, you're meant to like take over neighborhoods and grow your criminal empire in the city. And
and one of the things that I noticed about it initially when I was sort of reading through like the little sort of prep PDF that you sent us is a lot of the Powered by the Apocalypse games that I've played before, they use like a very simple sort of like 2 dice mechanic where you roll like a couple of dice, you add a skill rating to it. If you get sort of 10 plus, that's a great success. 7 to 9, you've succeeded, but something might have occurred to complicate things. Then you get 6 or less. Like basically, the GM decides what happens, but normally it's unfortunate for you. But I noticed that Scum and Villainy uses like a die. It has a similar sort of resolution mechanic, but it uses like a dice pool system rather than just 2 dice.
Yep, and that there's a whole lot that ties into like how that all works. But as we discovered, and especially you John, or rather your character discovered, that the idea in Blaze in the Dark and the derivatives is your characters are quite capable, and they need to be because their lives are kind of shit, to be honest. They are quite capable, and you have a lot of opportunity to resist the bad things that come your way, but you have a limited capability of withstanding the consequences of resisting that stuff. For example, your character, you filled out your stress track in our first session, and you gained 1 trauma, which is like if you gain 4 trauma, your character retires because they can't deal with the life anymore, which is true for Blaze in the Dark as well. So the idea is that you get to roll quite a few dice, and I think for Hannah especially, like you rolled several times, and you kept rolling 6s as your highest number, which is like cool, you did the thing, like nothing bad happens. You kept doing that, and that's as a direct result of having a bunch of dice to roll, because you choose the highest number that you rolled, and you kept rolling at least 1 6, so you were good on that front. However, the others maybe not so much, but still, like you got your stuff did. You resisted being knocked down, you resisted being subjected to consequences at the expense of gaining stress, and in John's case here, you gained one of your, basically you lost, like, let's say 1/4 of your like mental hit points permanently, because you have a trauma now as a result of this.
I quite like the idea as well. Like when you get the trauma, you pick like the descriptor that goes with it. So in my case, because I was trying to resist damage from this weird like psychic crystal artifact we'd come across when I like acquired the trauma, I went for the obsessed descriptor. So like my character becoming obsessed with these arcane artifacts and studying them to understand the way, the mysterious force that moves through all things. So I quite like the fact that even when, like say, even though I've lost like 1/4 of like my mental hit points, and like you said, when you hit 4, that's your character.
Yeah,
done.
that's it.
So, but even though I've done that, it's still given me a jumping off point for like more role playing and more advice how to like play my character. It's like a new aspect to them.
Yeah, and it's also it opens up an additional advancement trigger for your character, because one of the experience point triggers in this game is you struggle with trouble from your trauma or your vice, and you didn't have that before, and now you do. So whenever you bring in some as a result of being like, oh wait, I think I saw a crystal over there, I need to go look, and everyone's like, no, don't. And when you get yourself into trouble as a result of your obsession, you get advancement points for your character, which was not possible before you had the trauma.
Yeah, and I think, as we've already said, that it pulls on a lot of different sort of inspiration. One of the things I liked about it is at the start you get to pick one of a list of like special abilities for your character. Now, Hannah, you went for like the Doctor style character, didn't you? And I went for the Mystic, which is like your Jedi sort of force.
Off-brand Jedi.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like sort of Poundland Jedi, and all of the special abilities for that. And I don't know about your Doctor ones, but certainly all the ones I looked at, the Mystic, they're all sort of instantly recognizable as like, oh yeah, this is like the bit where you can like push people using the Force. Oh, I can enhance a weapon with like energy or whatever, and effectively make it into a lightsaber. So I love the fact that there was almost like too much good stuff on the character. And you get to. I always love that in a game when I'm like, oh yeah, I'd like any of these, and then you just have to pick one. But there was none of them on there that I'd have picked. I mean, I don't know what the ones were like for you, for the Doctor.
I took the first one that I saw. It was the first one on the list. It was the only one to take because it was called "Damn It, I'm a Doctor, not a..." ...
Oh,
that was the one that basically if you go like, damn it, I'm a doctor, not a first-class pod racing pilot. It lets you roll you take some stress and you roll your doctor sort of ability instead of what your piloting ability or whatever else.
My use of it was, damn it, I'm a doctor, not a security guard, as I was trying to tackle that massive guy.
Yeah, you were trying to put the sleeper hold on the assassin. Yeah. Which you did.
Eventually.
Yeah.
One of the other...
It didn't go quite as smoothly as I'd hoped.
Well, that's the point of the game, though, isn't it?
But a mechanism that I very much liked with the game was the fact that it, by using the sort of plot setup mechanism and then the like downtime mechanism, it sort of sets up the story for you very, very quickly.
Yes.
And it skips you straight into an action sequence. And obviously, because it was the first session and none of us are very like familiar with the dice rolling system,
Mm-hmm.
that combat did take us quite a while that time. But because we were already like invested in the game, we hadn't had 2 hours of like waffle and looking around for maps and whatever before we actually got to that sort of climactic combat. And yourself, I'm not sure if I mentioned at the time, but very much props on like telegraphing what was going on between the guy who we'd got a bounty on and the guy who he was trying to protect and all of that stuff. Because within about 3 seconds of the professor turning up, out of character, I knew where the story was going. And it was like, it felt like I'd been watching a movie for 2 hours and we were on to like the entertaining action sequence towards the end, even though we'd only been gaming for about half an hour.
That is one of the great strengths I think of the and also one of the things that I think will not appeal to a certain kind of player, and that's entirely, let's just put it out there, that's fine if you don't like it, but I do.
The idea the waffle and the wandering around trying to solve puzzles and looking for secret doors, this is not the game for you.
This is not that. This is the game telling you and me as well as the game master that, like, don't worry about it. We'll backfill the thing. Like we'll just do it live. And
that's it.
Go in, and then when there's questions, you're like, well, I guess it was this all along.
Perhaps we should explain to people one of the ways in which the game tries to like sort of jumpstart you into the action is you have your sort of mission that you're on at the start, and then you come up with a plan for the mission, like how you want to approach it. And there's a few sort of different templates in the book, whether you want to like stealthily go and like infiltrate somewhere, whether you just want to like kick the door down and like burst in firing guns. You pick your sort of rough template, you fill in your plan, then you literally just make a roll for it to see how the plan goes. And it's only when something goes wrong or it starts getting interesting, that's when you go, right, now we're going to sort of zoom in on the action and we're going to play this out. So all the bit in the game that Johannes ran for us, we'd been hired to go and bring back this person called Thull, who was like an ex-assassin, and he'd gone rogue, and we were like legitimate bounty hunters going to get him. And also our secondary mission was to recover the original bounty that he'd sort of failed to do. So we didn't do all the, like, we're getting in a ship, we're like traveling across space to this like desert world where he is, we're like canvassing the city to try and find him. All right, we're talking to the locals, which there's a certain amount of enjoyment you can get from that sort of investigation. But for this sort of game, it's very much make a couple of rolls to establish the scene and the early parts of the mission. And then when things get interesting, in this case, when we found him in a local bathhouse and we were like, right, we've got to get in there and get him out. How are we going to do it? That's when you zoom in and you actually start playing out the sort of details of the scenario, which I very much enjoyed.
And then at the end of the session, there's another very similar mechanism, which I expect you'll explain a bit more in a moment, Johannes, where like you get the consequences from what you've done and a couple of next time on Scum and Villainy sort of threads. That's another nice element to it, because it makes you want to come back to the game because you know a bit of what's going to happen next time.
Yeah, because there's
like a teaser trailer.
There's like there's the heat mechanic way, depending on what you've done in your scenario, you can gain sort of heat with pressure in the sort of sector of space you're in, which in this game, because we only got, I think, 3, we have an ability, because we chose it at the start, where we're like licensed bounty hunters. So because we were pursuing a legit bounty, we can knock 3 off the heat. So effectively for that, we were like, we're golden. We've not got any undue problems because it's a legit bounty. We've done it. We've come back. We've collected the creds. Happy days. But obviously, if we did something that was a bit on the less legit side, shall we say, we wouldn't be able to use that, and we'd be getting more heat, which I think is a nice sort of abstract way of sort of recording how the things are going to change in the setting. Yeah.
So for like the thing that we're discussing now is at the end of a session of Scum and Villainy, and also the other similar like derived games of Blaze in the Dark, you roll for entanglements, which is the sort of like abstracted, amalgamated like result of your lives as a crew of dubious nature, and it brings something into the game which is usually some kind of trouble, and the severity depends on how many wanted levels you have, and that wanted levels are kind of the same as trauma. So like when your heat meter gets filled out, you get a wanted level, and that's not strictly just the official like authorities looking for you. It's basically the sort of, again, abstracted version of like people are looking at what you're doing because you're making waves, and our role, because we didn't have any heat, we didn't have any wanted levels, so it was the mildest possible things, and we rolled, and the result was new quote unquote friends, and it was up to me to pick a neutral faction, so a faction we hadn't any ties to before, and they would offer quote unquote a mission to the crew, and if the crew would decline the mission, then they would be a neutral faction no longer, and it would instead be a slightly hostile faction because you rebuffed their request. And it goes like that's one of the results, which is fairly mild because it's like someone just showing up and you're like, hey, I want you to work for me. And then you're like, nah, you're shifty. No, I don't want to. And then they're like, well, fine, like fuck you then. And that's it. It goes no further, but there's as you go up in the wanted levels, it might be like, and the Imperial cruiser shows up. And they have their tractor being popped on you, and like, no. Yeah,
I did like the fact as well that the experience system seems to be very much tied in to encourage you to do sort of like risky and sort of over the top like hijinks in the game.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Like doing stuff that might be troublesome, and of course, as a result, generate good stuff in the fiction of the game, like interesting bits.
Well, which is cool because like, I always think, when you see these sort of sci-fi bounty hunters and things, and they're like, oh, you've got to bring back so and so, like dead or alive. Like, why do they all just not walk around with like a sort of like long range like sniper rifle, see him in the distance, and just be like, all right, I'll just collect the body. Obviously, that's morally repugnant, but it's like it's a lot more convenient for the bounty hunter. And likewise, in sort of like role play games, often there's not really a reason to not sort of like do things in like the quickest, most like brutally efficient way. Whereas I think in this, because the advancement relies on you sort of like trying out these wacky sort of like plans and getting into all complicated hijinks, the system itself actually encourages the sort of game the designers want you to be playing with, which is, I think, a good thing. Yeah,
at least for me, being the kind of design wonk that I am, is that's how you tell a good game. Like if the game, by the design itself, by which I mean the rules, if the rules generate the good stuff, like the interesting fiction in the game, that's a good game because it helps you do the thing that you want to do as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the strengths, and I suppose potentially also one of the weaknesses of the various like Powered by the Apocalypse derived games, because they are sort of so focused on telling a certain type of game. It's like Scum Villainy. It's focused on you're a crew on board a ship. You've got a ship. You owe money to people. You owe favors to people. To pay those off, you take various jobs. Other hijinks ensue. You get embroiled in the relationship between all these different factions. Now, you couldn't just sort of run this game and go, oh, I'm just going to settle down and be like an interstellar trader. Mm-hmm. Or like, oh yeah, I could be like an independent bounty hunter, but I'm going to like sign on for the rebellion and try and like destroy the Imperial Death Star or whatever. Well, you could do, but not without like a lot more work, because the game is sort of focused on, these are the stories we're telling. And I think the strength of that is it allows them to really focus everything, the background, the mechanics, on telling that specific type of story. The potential disadvantage is it's not going to be something like a more generic system where you can pick up like a generic sci-fi system and you can go, right, well, with this rule system, we can tell whatever sci-fi story we want in whatever universe we're telling. But the sort of trade-off for that is if you've got your more generic sci-fi system, whatever story you tell, it's going to involve a certain amount of work to prep it and to point the game in that direction because it's general. Whereas if you're happy with the sort of game that a Powered by the Apocalypse game is offering you, it's all there for you. There's tools to support you. You can get up and running with that very quick. So you mentioned Tremulous earlier on. If you want to play a sort of a Cthulhu Mythos style game using the Powered by the Apocalypse rules, where you inevitably receive cosmic like enlightenment and go mental at the end of it as you're struggling against evil cults and stuff like that, then great, Tremulous has got you covered. If you're just like, oh, I want to play a different type of game in like the 1920s, like Tremulous will not do that for you.
Yeah, it doesn't help. It doesn't help in that. And there's been attempts, and I say attempts, but people have made sort of stripped down versions of Powered by the Apocalypse, basically the main resolution mechanic.
Yeah.
You could go out and pick up like World of Dungeons, I think it's called.
Yes. Yeah.
Sort of like you just like boil Dungeon World until there's like bones left, and then you take those out and you play with those. People have done versions of that, and I think, yeah, of course, it's like today you could play whatever game you wanted if you just wanted to use the simple mechanics of 2d6, 10 plus, great success, 9 to 7. Yes, but, and then 6 or below, the other person tells you what happens. You could play a game with just these rules like forever, but it's like that's it. Like you need to provide everything else. And
yeah,
I think that the strength is exactly in what John you just said, that the games are focused on the thing that they are doing instead of being like, this is a toolbox that you can do anything with. They are like, this is a very specific I don't know what's the screwdriver from Doctor Who, the Sonic. Yeah, this is a very specific Sonic screwdriver. It only screws Sonic. So I enjoy that greatly. However, I also like the because it's different tools for different jobs, right? If I want to play Scum Villainy, I will play it, but I will also be playing what is it called? The Stars Without Number revised edition again going forward. Yes. Even though I could play the exact same thing in both of these games, the game is going to be different because of the rules. And I like stuff in Scum and Villainy, and I like stuff in Stars Without Number. Stars Without Number revised, and for different reasons, which is the main thing. Like these games aren't really comparable in that way because they are blatantly different entities.
Yeah, I mean, to give another example of that, you're running us through Tatters of the King for Call of Cthulhu at the moment, myself and Dennis, and obviously that uses the Call of Cthulhu system. And we've referenced Tremulous earlier, but Tremulous is like a sort of hyper sort of condensed, like particular version of like a mythos story,
you
know, where it's sort of like hyper accelerated to like get you to that end sort of point. Whereas in the Call of Cthulhu game, it's a bit more sort of leisurely. You know, you can take your time, you can wander around, you can do more stuff. And I like both the games. I love going like, oh, let's play a Tremulous one shot. I'll make a few choices off this like this play set. Oh yeah, this is what the spooky town's like. Go and investigate what the evil cult is in the town. Boom, there's a nice little adventure you can do. But it's also nice if you want a bit of a longer game to go, oh, it's nice to have a slightly more relaxed game where you can wander around, you can chew the scenery a bit more, you can investigate in a bit more detail.
Yeah, and
like I say, different tools for different jobs.
Yeah, different tools for different jobs. Like, what do you want to do? Get the right tool for that thing, instead of being well, not to throw too much shade on anyone particularly, but there's a lot of D20 games that did not need to be D20 games out there. Like just a ton of them could have been their own system or a different system instead of being D&D, but then it's like, oh, space and lasers. I favor specificity and intent when it comes to these sort of things, because that's when you get the best results, instead of using a wrong tool or a extremely generic tool that can get the job done, but it's going to take a lot more out of you.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, to carry on like the sort of hardware methodology, it's like if you're trying to put in a screw into like a bit of wood, it's like technically anything that fits in that slot, you can you can put in there and you can twist to put that screw in. But if you've got like a nice electric screwdriver, where you just go,
done. Yeah, you could use a hammer. You could use a hammer to get the screw in. It might not be pretty.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, even just hammering a nail in, you could hit that with your shoe and hammer it in. Absolutely fine. It'd work, but it'd take you a long time. Or you could get like an actual hammer it in. That'd take you even less time. Or you could get a nail gun and be like, done.
Yeah, so we turned into a hardware store now. So
well, Hannah works for a hardware store. So.
Yeah. So next time we're going to be reviewing tools. Apparently,
that's it. Yeah, get to start up a tool podcast. We hope you've enjoyed that episode. If you want to get in touch with us, you can drop us an email. The address is rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. Or if you want to leave us a voicemail message, you can head over to our page on speakpipe.com, and that will allow you to leave a 90-second voicemail, and you might even be featured in a future show. There's a link to this included in the show notes, as well as a link to our website and other places where you can contact us. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you soon.